Well, hello, beautifuls, and welcome to another episode of the GiftEd Table. Today, we're going to keep it short and sweet, but we want to focus on 3 tips for having courageous conversations right here at the GiftEd Table. I've been thinking recently about having courageous conversations with people who are on your team, with your staff members. And I was reflecting on some years ago when I had to have a really courageous conversation with a teacher on my staff. I was an assistant principal at the time, and this particular teacher was having a really tough time professionally. Not that the children in her classroom were overly disruptive, but there were some personal things that were impacting her professional life. She was a first grade teacher at the time, and you would often hear her just yelling at the students, like from the hallway. They were told they had to sit with their hands clasped together, looking straight ahead while she took roll or while she was reading. There was no engagement. But when they did have the opportunity to engage, the students were so very delightful, so smart, and they really tried their best. But because of some personal things that were happening with her in her life, it was impacting how she was deflecting that and taking those emotions out in her classroom with these first graders. So if you can imagine, these young 6-year-olds were becoming, you would say, just a dumping ground for whatever emotional instability she was dealing with at the time. So I had to have a courageous conversation with her. I did. And I talked to my principal at the time about how I would conduct this conversation. And so there's 3 things that I recall doing that I want to impart on you, and you may already do these things when you have to have these courageous conversations. I started with positive affirmation because she was not a horrible teacher, but she was becoming very disjointed in her profession. She was a great instructor, had really great lesson plans, was really creative in her craft. But at the time, it was truly impacting her relationships with students, her relationships with parents, and her relationships with her peers. So I started off with positive affirmations. I started off with just reminding her of all of the great things she was doing. First of all, thank you for coming to work every day on time. Thank you for being prepared, for having very structured plans and outcomes that you intended for your students to have. So started with some positive. And then after I gave her the positive affirmations, I began with questioning. I questioned her on what is happening right now with you professionally. And I put it back on her. I wanted to know what she felt was happening. And we went through the whole realm of what she did, and I kept asking, and what else? Or I would say, tell me more. The second thing I did, the second tip you do as a leader, is that you give factual evidence of what you've observed, of what you have encountered, and perhaps what you may have even documented. So I started with evidence. Well, I noticed that the last 3 times I've come into your classroom, before I even get to your classroom, I can hear you yelling at the students. And then when I would come into your classroom, it wasn't disruptive. The students were being very respectful, but your tone was just so disheartening. It was frightening for the students. I could see it in their faces. And then I've noticed that your lesson plans as of lately have not been concrete. You haven't really had a really clear plan, but you expect the students to follow suit. So I went through all these things. I gave factual evidence of what I've observed, and we had the conversation. And it was a hard conversation. It really was. Though I had to have these difficult conversations and ask these difficult questions and give all this difficult evidence, I had to be true because it was for the center was the children and how it was impacting them. But then I also wanted to know what she needed from me at the time. How could I support her as a site leader? How could I support her as a colleague? How could I support her at work when she probably felt she had nowhere else to turn? And it actually got to some of those conversations. Is this where you want to be? Is this the position you want to be in right now? Because if it's not working for the students, perhaps this isn't what's working for you. And there took some reflection. It really did. Some tears were flowing. But we had to have that conversation. The third thing was coming up with some reasonable outcomes and some expectations that I was going to hold her to. That was the accountability piece. So I gave her some directives. This is what I need to see. I will be in your classroom this many times. And we agreed upon some things. It wasn't just the finger wagging, this is what you better do. No, there were some concrete things I expected to see. And then I asked, what is it that you would like to change? What is it that you would like to work on? So there was some collaboration there, but I had to hold firm because that third tip, it was the accountability piece, the accountability. And just for bonus, in case you didn't know, document everything. Document everything. Document the conversation. Do a follow-up correspondence, be it an email, be it a written notice, just detailing what the conversation was about, the evidence that you brought forth, and the expected outcomes that you will have for your staff and employees. It's hard to do, but we have to do that as leaders. And this is part of your gift as a leader. And you'll never realize how much your personal touch will help impact or influence someone on your team. And it might influence them to do better or to revamp their resume. You never know. So those are the 3 tips I have for you today on courageous conversations. We will have a special guest next week, and we're going to have another live coming up in February. And February is the month of engaging with others. In January, we engaged in our own leadership. In February, we're engaging with others. And so this is a tip for engaging with others. So until next time, remember, stay grounded, innovative, fierce, transparent every day. In other words, stay gifted. And don't forget to like this with a big thumbs up, subscribe if you're not a subscriber, and I'll see you next time. Bye.